think of ourselves as the most powerful beings in the universe, it's unsettling to discover that we're wrong. Time has come to see the world as it is.
Can we pull back the veil of static and reach into the source of all being? Behind this curtain lies this random pattern generator. You will be responsible for an escalation that will destroy everything.
Hello, welcome to the first episode of Chaos Shamanism. I'm not going to use my real name on here, so you can just refer to me as the Clairsentience Psychonaut. I just wanted to give a little explanation for why I chose the title Chaos Shamanism. Well, first of all, chaos not as in, what you might think of as discord and destructive disorder, but chaos is in the sense of the term chaos magic. A Google search shows the definition of chaos magic as an attitude, a philosophy that promotes experimentation, play, and creativity while discarding dogmatic rules. Chaos magic points out that the techniques, more than the symbols, are what matter, and that our belief in a system is actually what makes it work. Now, the Wikipedia definition for chaos magic is a contemporary magical practice which emphasizes the pragmatic use of belief systems and the creation of new and unorthodox methods. Okay, now I'm going to read something from the website Ultraculture, which is at ultraculture.org. It says, chaos magic is a postmodern system of magic that emerged during the late 20th century in England. During the late 1970s, early 1980s, occult thinkers Peter J. Carroll and Ray Sherwin were looking to define a system of magic that didn't accept the dogma of the traditions that came before it, and instead sought results based on performing the magical operations of a given system. Chaos magic values an eclectic approach toward belief, and its practitioners will adopt new beliefs and identities as they see fit to match the results they're looking to get. Influenced by the writings of early 20th century painter and sorcerer Austin Osman Spare, as well as taking inspiration for the ideas of countercultural figures like Robert Anton Wilson and William S. Burroughs, the early chaos magicians suffused a core system based on the individual practitioner's achievement of gnosis, a state of altered consciousness that exists beyond reason and the senses. Now, this article lists a handful of public figures that have talked about having an interest in or practicing chaos magic. The first one is one that's probably one of the most well-known ones, is William S. Burroughs, the author of classic countercultural works like Naked Lunch, The Soft Machine, and Nova Express. It says, Burroughs was fascinated by altered states of consciousness, and it shows in his hallucinatory writings, as well as his lifelong drug habit. His interest in altered states of consciousness led him to a more schooled interest in magic, with a particular interest in Hassan-i Sabah, whose dictum, "Nothing is true, everything is permitted," was of particular influence on the system of chaos magic. Along with Brian Geisen, Burroughs was one of the originators of the cut-up technique of writing. Now, the next one listed is Robert Anton Wilson. And it says, Robert Anton Wilson's books, like the Illuminatus trilogy and Cosmic Trigger, were early influences on the development of chaos magic. You could say that his suffusion of Sufism, Taoism, Zen, general semantics, Thelema, and a host of other philosophical and mystical traditions made him an early adopter of chaos magic. Next is Genesis Breyer P. Orridge. Genesis Breyer P. Orridge is a highly celebrated artist and founding member of influential music acts Throbbing Grizzle and Psychic TV. With Throbbing Grizzle, Genesis was instrumental in the creation of industrial music, and with Psychic TV, helped to spearhead the burgeoning rave scene in the 1980s. In 1981, Genesis founded the Temple of Psychic Youth, an informal international occult order. Next is Grant Morrison. Grant Morrison is the author of The Invisibles, an epic comic series designed as a hypersigil, inspired by a UFO abduction/mystical experience Morrison had in Kathmandu. Morrison has been very vocal about his practice of chaos magic. Next is Alan McGee. Alan McGee is the founder of Creation Records, the label responsible for launching the careers of the Jesus and Mary Chain, Primal Scream, My Bloody Valentine, and Oasis. Peter J. Carroll's Liber Null was of particular interest to McGee, who said in an interview, "I'm more into the chaos magicians like Peter J. Carroll, Austin Osman Spare, and the films of Kenneth Anger and stuff like that, and Grant Morrison. Liber Null was a massive learning curve for me. It was a life changer for me, that book Liber Null." Now, those I'm not so surprised by. I knew about all those. In fact, I'm a big fan of Grant Morrison, Genesis P. Orridge, Robert Anton Wilson, and William Burroughs, even though Burroughs is the one I would really like to know a lot more about. But the next people listed were quite a bit more of a surprise to me. For instance, Die Antwoord. Ultraculture previously did a deep dive on the occult symbolism in Die Antwoord's music video for Pitbull Terrier, and the South African rap duo consisting of Ninja and Yolandi have been revealing more and more of their interest in chaos magic. Their latest record, Donker Mag, features an androgynous nude Yolandi covered with sigils on the cover. Their latest music video, Ugly Boy, Heavily features imagery associated with chaos magic, such as the 8-pointed chaos sphere. Next, Aphex Twin. The enigmatic and reclusive electronic music legend Aphex Twin, real name Richard D. James, recently spoke about the influence of chaos magic on his artistic output. In a Guardian article about his new album Zero, James stated that he pretty much believes in magic. Quoting, "Even if none of it's true, it's just 1,000 times better than any science fiction film that's ever been written," he said. "You can't only believe things which can be proven. It's boring." He also opened up about the mysterious origins of his logo. "You think of something that you want to happen, then you turn it into something that looks like a magic symbol, and then you put it out in the world, and it works," James said. "It does, but if you tell anyone what the symbol means, then it will stop working. Now, I've got a new sigil that's been in development for ages, but it's not looking right yet." Lastly, Damon Albarn. While not a chaos magician in a strict sense, Albarn is yet another celebrity who has recently come clean about his interest in the occult. A few years ago, Albarn released a concept album, an opera, about 16th century mystic and alchemist John Dee, entitled simply Dr. Dee. A 2011 piece in The Guardian reports, Albarn is particularly fascinated by Dee's quote-unquote horrible final years in ruined exile in Manchester after dabbling with the occult. Magic and the occult are part of my life. I've got to come out of the closet with this," admits Albarn. As well as spending time in Chetham's library, where Dee used to study, and legend has it, once summoned up the devil. There's a burn mark on a table there, supposedly from Satan's hoof. Albarn reveals that he has actually tried to contact the quote-unquote old man spiritually to find out what went wrong. "He hasn't told me anything," he adds dryly. Yeah, I gotta say, that's really interesting to me because I'm a big fan of Aphex Twin and Damon Albarn, and, especially his band Blur, so that's pretty awesome. That article was written by Andre Burke. All right, now to get into the word shamanism. A Google search defines shaman as a person regarded as having access to and influence in the world of benevolent and malevolent spirits, who typically enters into a trance state during a ritual and practices divination and healing. Now, I know people have a lot of different ideas and concepts about what exactly a shaman is. I think that to be a true shaman in the traditional sense, you have to know all about the plants in your area and their medicinal attributes. And you also have to act as a sort of physician and therapist for your people. Now, in my use of the term for the title, I'm considering a shaman to be, at their core, basically somebody who can interact with spirits, while other people cannot. So basically the term chaos shamanism, and how I mean it, is referring to a sort of self-taught, free-form, and evolving approach to communication and interaction with spirits and spiritual forces and energies. And I think that's the best way I can describe my spiritual experiences and practices. I delve quite a bit into things which could be paralleled with voodoo, and I dabble a little bit in Western magic and a tiny bit into Eastern mystical practices as well. But those things aren't nearly as pronounced in my life as my evolution of interacting with and learning from spirits, as well as being able to help and heal myself and others with spiritual energies. And that syncs up a lot more with shamanism than anything else. So that should explain quite a bit about why I decided to call this podcast what I did. And now on to the next segment.
What the hell in God's name is going down here?
Now in this section, I wanted to just read little bits from different books that refer to very bizarre and seemingly impossible news stories that different people have gathered from around the world and throughout time. It's, just a little something that shows you just how bizarre and unknown to us the world really may be. I was thinking about reading about 3 of these per episode. Now, the ones I'm going to read today are from the book The New Inquisition by Robert Anton Wilson, who was mentioned earlier in the podcast. 22nd February 1981, New Sunday Times, Malaysia. A boy, age 15, has been running an abnormally high temperature for 10 years, since he was 5. Doctors find nothing wrong with him, and he is not ill or distressed. Neighbors call him Fireboy, it says. What are we to make of a yarn like this? Some, I suppose, will believe it, and some will attribute it to the ubiquitous, unscrupulous reporter, the gent who is responsible for all bizarre and sensational newspaper stories, of course. Another one, 26 February 1981, Straits Times, Singapore. An 18-month-old infant girl in Mianyang, southwest China, also has an abnormally high temperature. Unlike the Malaysian Fireboy, she was born with this condition. Alleged doctors have allegedly examined her and allegedly found no medical problems. The ubiquitous, unscrupulous reporter strikes again. Phenomena by Michel and Ricard, Timms and Hudson, 1977, page 24. In 1934, an asthma patient named Anna Monaro developed a blue luminescence around her breast when she was asleep and only when she was asleep. Many doctors were involved in trying to explain this mystery, but no single explanation was acceptable to all of them, so they argued endlessly while Signora Monaro continued to glow. The case is discussed in London Times for May 1934. 7th September, 1871, New York Herald. Nathan Coker, a blacksmith of Easton, Maryland, was immune to pain from fire, but not to other kinds of pain. The Herald alleges that Coker demonstrated this immunity to various scientific investigators by performing such feats as holding hot pokers to his skin without flinching and swelling molten lead in his mouth, spitting it out without any burn marks on tongue or lips.
What the hell in God's name is going down here?
That was a public service announcement designed to scare the shit out.
Now, I just wanted to briefly describe why I chose the term clairsentient psychonaut. Okay, now a Google search defines clairsentience as the following. Clairsentience, which means clear sensing, is the ability to feel the present, past, or future physical and emotional states of others without the use of the normal 5 senses. Psychics who are clairsentient are able to retrieve information from houses, public buildings, and outside areas. Now, this term somewhat defines me in that I am able to feel people's emotional states when I am physically close to them, but I can also feel the emotional states of people you can't see or hear, in other words, spirits. An interesting thing is that I can also feel the effects of drugs that people are on if I stand close to them as well. You know, for instance, I've sat next to somebody on the airplane and instantly felt the effect of a strong opiate, and then the woman told me after the fact that she was on a considerable amount of Xanax. Okay, there's another term that seems to apply to what I have going on with me, is clairempathy. Clairempathy is defined as a psychic ability. Normal human empathy is not. Psychics with this special ability are able to act as emotional or medical surrogates for others and directly experience what others are feeling. Now, in my life, there have been upsides and downsides to this. For example, an upside is that I can tell without any visual cues if I've offended somebody in a conversation. Now, a downside to it is that waiting in line is agony, because people tend to not be very happy when they're waiting in line and you're standing right next to them. It is awful. Imagine horrible building anxiety on top of nausea so strong you feel like you're going to throw up. That's what it feels like for me to stand next to somebody who's unhappy. Okay, now something else about me that seems to factor more into clairsentience than clairempathy is the fact that spirits can physically move my body. They can grab my arm and pull it up or down. They can even push me. I've even been attacked physically, which is, of course, not pleasant. So you can see why I use the adjective clairsentient in my name for this podcast. All right, now on to the term psychonaut. Okay, now Wikipedia defines psychonaut as psychonautics refers both to a methodology for describing and explaining the subjective effects of altered states of consciousness, especially an important subgroup called holotropic states, including those induced by meditation or mind-altering substances, and to a research paradigm in which the researcher voluntarily immerses himself or herself into an altered mental state in order to explore the accompanying experiences. The term has been applied diversely to cover all activities by which altered states are induced and utilized for spiritual purposes or the exploration of the human condition, including shamanism, lamas of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, sensory deprivation, and archaic/modern drug users who use entheogenic substances in order to gain deeper insights and spiritual experiences. A person who uses altered states for such exploration is known as a psychonaut. Now, I thought this term was appropriate for me because I have used mild amounts of psychedelics in my spiritual path, especially in the earlier days, and I also use self-induced sleep states like subsleep and lucid dreaming, and also some lesser forms of meditation, though that's something I really need to get into more. I think I should also add, though, that when I first started to experience feeling spirits and communicating with them, it was not during a psychedelic experience. I was sober. I just think that bears importance. I also want to say that I really dislike the term psychic. Not only does it bring up a lot of fictional concepts in people's minds, but it's also associated with frauds who rip people off with lies. I should say also that I cannot read people's minds, so don't think that's ever been a part of anything I can do. I can feel their emotions. It's quite different. All right, on to the next segment.
He was abducted by aliens earlier this afternoon. That little girl got lost under the bed. She went into an alternate dimension.
All right, in this segment, I wanted to read excerpts from some of my favorite nonfiction books. The selections I chose for this episode are introductions of sorts to a lot of what I'm going to be talking about in this podcast and reading from. Okay, the first one I want to read is also from The New Inquisition by Robert Anton Wilson, which is put out by New Falcon Publications and was printed first in 1986. The late J.B. Priestley often spoke out against what he called the Citadel, the scientific technological elite which both supports and is supported by our military-industrial alpha males. The Citadel in most countries gets millions of pounds for every 2 pence doled out to the humanities, the social studies, or the arts. It devotes most of its time and intellect to the task, as Buckminster Fuller used to say, of delivering more and more explosive power over greater and greater distances in shorter and shorter times to kill more and more people. The Citadel has always been arrogant and intensely territorial. After all, it grew out of the science and philosophy of the 18th and 19th centuries, and has inherited many qualities of that epoch, including anti-religious bias. The Citadel had to fight the church to find its own place in the world, and also including tacit allegiance to the political powers that support and feed it. In casting a Swiftian eye on the modern Laputa, I am not advocating any specific old or new paradigm. I am merely advocating agnosticism and tolerance of dissent, for the usual reasons that political libertarians advocate those attitudes. As Lord Acton said, all power corrupts, and I think the Citadel has acquired enough power and corruption to become, at times, as dangerous to open inquiry and free speculation as the Church ever was. Of course, the Citadel is a metaphor, a rhetorical convenience. Many of the most creative scientists of the past half-century have dissented vehemently from official Citadel dogma and even engaged in heresy. Among physicists, Einstein had a personal cosmic religion, which sounds like pantheism to me. Schrödinger, Oppenheimer, and Bohm have all been influenced by Oriental mysticism. Bohr said his favorite philosophers were the mystic pragmatist William James and the Christian existentialist Kierkegaard, and took a Taoist religious symbol for his coat of arms when knighted by the Danish court. The English astronomers Jeans and Eddington both became mystics. The American astronomer Hynek dissents from Citadel dogma by insisting UFOs are worthy of serious investigation. Edison became a spiritualist, and 2 other electrical pioneers, Tesla and Marconi, insisted, despite ridicule, that they had received intelligence signals from outer space. America's most respected anthropologist, Margaret Mead, fought tooth and nail to get the heretical parapsychologists admitted to the American Association for the Advancement of Science. The great biologist-mathematician, J.P.S. Haldane, preferred Marx's dynamic dialectical materialism to fundamentalist materialism and studied yoga seriously. A surprising number of quote-unquote scientific materialists are not scientists at all, but cranky village atheists left over from horse and buggy days. The priests who serve the Citadel, the scientific technological elite of our time, are paid workers on salary, and most of their earnings derive from the military-industrial complex that owns and governs most of the world and wishes to own and govern the rest of the world as well. One does not have to be a dogmatic Marxist to accept some of the Marxist reality tunnel, some but not all of it, and wonder if the priests of the Citadel have a vested economic interest in supporting the axioms of their employers and of imperialist materialist philosophy in general. For instance, it has been hazardous to economic self-interest in some cases to wander even as far from fundamentalist materialism as to accept the heresy of dialectical materialism. To embrace a nonviolent religious sect means, in many cases, that one is obliged by conscience to resign from the Citadel. These are potent, if tacit, factors in determining the reality tunnel within the Citadel. Most of the employees of the Citadel are white and most are male. These are other potent sources of bias, and one can even predict from them what sort of ideas in general are regarded as unthinkable within the Citadel. To deny that these economic statistical factors influence the models and reality tunnels in the Citadel is to contradict the major findings of the last 100 years of sociology, anthropology, and social psychology. That the philosophy of fundamentalist materialism is the only known philosophy that justifies the behavior of the military-industrial complex is hardly a coincidence. Christianity, Buddhism, existentialism, and other philosophies regard the materialist, militarist elite as monstrous. We will see evidence that skepticism and blind faith often turn into each other if somebody is logical enough or mad enough to pursue them to that point of pure abstract consistency, where ordinary common sense is left behind in the rush for certitude. It is obvious that every dogmatic faith produces around itself a secondary layer of doubt, denial, and outright skepticism about rival faiths. The most bigoted Bible fundamentalist, for instance, is capable of quite corrosive cynicism about the miracles of Buddha. The most fanatic Marxist is also a cynic about the infallibility of the Pope. The Ayatollah Khomeini believes every word of the Quran, he says, but he is downright atheistic about the pronouncements of the U.S. State Department. This is universal. Every faith, every acceptance creates a necessary doubt or rejection for things outside the faith. Every idol is jealous of other idols. Less obviously, the humorless or obsessive or crusading skeptic has his or her own blind faith, a psychological scotoma that is unconscious and therefore unacknowledged. To deny dogmatically is to say that something is impossible. But to assert this is to claim tacitly that you already know the full spectrum of the possible. In a century in which every decade has brought new and astonishing scientific shocks, that is a huge, brave, and audacious faith indeed. It requires an almost heroic self-confidence and an equally gigantic ignorance of recent intellectual history. The only escape from this trap, as far as I can see, is to be skeptical about one's own skepticism, which is what I mean by the new agnosticism. Fall 1984 Skeptical Inquirer, Journal of the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, Volume 9, Number 1, page 44. Article by Professor Mario Munge, quoting, "Likewise, telepathy may be a fact after all, though not clairvoyance, precognition, or psychokinesis, all of which conflict with basic physical laws." End quote. Leaving aside Professor Munge's odd tolerance about telepathy, black heresy to get printed in that journal, note well what his sentence says and what it implies. It seems to me that it implies that he already knows all the laws of the universe, or all the important ones, and that is what I mean by a huge and audacious faith. To you and me and the man and woman in the street, it is now obvious that nobody in the past ever knew all the laws or all the important laws. The scientists of 1904 were astounded by the discoveries of 1910, those of 1914 by the discoveries of 1920, etc. From this, we have learned a certain mild agnosticism or open-mindedness. We are prepared to be startled by new discoveries. Professor Munge is not so prepared. He knows in advance what is possible and what is not possible. Few theologians these days dare to speak with that kind of dogmatic authority. Professor Munge's skepticism has become a blind faith. A faith that he knows in 1984 what may or may not be proved in 1990.
Science can explain everything if we look hard enough.
Shut up, science bitch.
Now, I decided to read the book excerpts in a rather specific loose order, if you will, because it creates a sort of narrative or transition into stories and concepts that might be a little too hard to accept otherwise. Well, I think that'll do it for this first introductory episode. Well, thank you all for listening, and keep an eye out for the next one.
Not only is he like ruining my life, but with all this God shit that he's into, he could be ruining my afterlife.
It's a sort of interdimensional vagina that somehow appears. I can interact with it.
Fabric of the entire universe could be torn apart.
I know my mind is changing, but I'm already too far gone to know what to do.